Hey everyone, Rick here, and folks, welcome to Dicey Depths Advanced, and welcome to the dungeon. Everything that you're seeing here, I actually posted a full video of how I set everything up, walked through room by room, passage by passage, but I wanted to do this kind of introduction once I had everything all set up. So for those of you who just want to get in and get out, because I know this video is long, you know how excitable that I get when I do these videos. So I definitely rambled on and on and on. But originally, stay tuned because right after this intro, I show how this whole thing, I have the top for my table actually fits perfectly over this when all the rooms are empty, because that's how the game will begin. All these rooms will be empty, and in between sessions I can have the tabletop on there and play other games, which is fantastic. But when it's time to game, all the rooms are empty. Here's how it works. We begin going down the stairs into the first room. There are 13 rooms, and by no coincidence, there are 13 cards in the room's deck. Every room we enter, we draw a card. It'll tell us what the room is. We roll a d3 for any kind of room effect, and then we populate the room. There are 20 monster cards, which means 13 rooms. We're not even going to see all the potential monsters, but once we fill the room in with, I have all the dressing pieces separated out by room in these little containers. Once we enter a room, find out what it is, we populate it, we furnish it. We then will draw from the monster deck to see what exactly we are up against, and roll to see how many of that monster are in the room. Of course, roll for their attributes, and combat begins. Then, every single room is connected by a passageway, and some passageways are, T-intersections and whatnot. We will roll to see if the party is able to disarm a trap. Every passageway has a potential trap. If we fail to disarm the trap, we will draw from the traps deck. It'll let us know what the trap is. We will then place the trap, whatever it is, in the passageway to remind us that for the remainder of the game, we are going to have to roll to avoid the trap. We've already sprung it. There's no future attempts to disarm it. If we wanted to backtrack through a passage for whatever reason, we're going to have to roll to avoid the trap again. But that's what we did. Later in the video, you're going to see, if you stay tuned, because I'm telling you folks, I had an absolute blast. We drew every single one of these rooms. We drew every single one of the monster cards that we populated the rooms with. Here's the chapel full of spiders. Here is the throne room with a rat man. We went through room by room and filled them all out. We also went passageway by passageway, sticking traps in there as well. And then finally, and I explain all this in the details of how the game's played, but once we get through all 13 rooms, the 14th is the boss chamber, which we set up a little sample scenario of what that may end up looking like at the end. But there it is, folks. This is Dicey Depths Advanced. I go through the accessories, the manufacture of the pieces. As you can tell, a lot of it is Dwarven Forge. Some of it's WizKids, miniatures from all over the place. Stay tuned for a full walkthrough of everything, but I did just want to give a brief introduction so we could take a peek at just how freaking sweet 3D fantasy roleplay-esque tabletop gaming can really be. Come on. Hey everyone, Rick here, and folks, are you ready? Are you ready for what is under the table cover? We have welcome to Dicey Depths Advanced. So folks, settle in. We're going to go through what this entails. Eventually, I would like to do a live playthrough of this. I anticipate this just being set up for a while. You're looking at it right now as a game would start. The dungeon. We know the layout. We have a map of the passageways and rooms. We don't know what's in each. We are going to be drawing from a deck of room cards to populate the rooms with furnishings and whatnot. We're going to be drawing from another deck of cards to determine if the passageways are trapped and with what kind of traps. And in this area over here, this is the final boss encounter, which we'll get to after a while. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you first lift the lid of the table off, which is fantastic. I love being able to set this up and leave it up and be able to play other games on top of the table with the lid closed in the meantime. And we will be back with more. All right, so what do we have here? Well, as mentioned, this is Dicey Depths Advanced. This is just a fantastic way for me to finally kind of implement some changes to the Dicey Depths system that I've been wanting to for quite a while. Because with, I had been using Warlock tiles, which was fantastic, but I wanted a big old dungeon layout, not just repopulating the rooms. And it was fantastic to travel around with, but I wanted something more static. And so Dwarven Forge was the ideal medium for this. Now, I will say originally my intention was to stick with their original resin dungeon pieces. So you can see here, these are the original resins with the felt on the bottom. Check my channel for full reviews on all of these original resin sets. But unfortunately, I ran out of pieces. Can you believe it? So, and I still have a lot of floors, but I ran out of straight walls was the big thing. So what you're seeing here is 4 room and passage sets of the original resin and 1 room set of the original resin. Now, unfortunately, I could not use the resin set doors because they are actually a little bit taller than the walls, and so I couldn't put the lid on the table on. As you can see, this is like, yeah, just like, can you even believe that? How crazy is that? How flush is that? But I mean, when you look at the dungeon, like from this angle, like, look at that. This is exactly why I'm a gamer right here. The views like this, unbelievable, miniature dungeon. So anyway, so that's 5 sets of resin Dwarven Forge. Unfortunately, I did run out of straight walls, so I did have to implement some of the Dwarvenite. So there are some Dwarvenite rooms in here. So here's one, for example. Now, don't ask me. Unfortunately, I don't know how many basic room sets there are. In fact, I don't even know. Do they even still sell the Dwarvenite sets that look like this? Or do they all have the columns integrated into the walls and floor, or the walls now? I don't even know. But here's what this looks like. The reason I had it set up like this is because I needed 13 rooms. The deck of room cards, which we'll go into all of this eventually, but just to give you a sneak peek, we do have a deck of room cards. And so when we start out, here's the entrance right here. This spiral staircase. This is going to be room number 1. And yes, we do have to flip over a card for room number 1. What room is it? Well, in this case, we walked right into the torture chamber. By the way, this whole thing is the subterranean bowels of a keep in a castle. And I have a whole nother scenario, which I'll probably do a video on later. Let me just give you a sneak peek right now. I wasn't planning on doing this, but so we have this whole castle set up here. Miniature Building Authority, of course. And it's kind of like if you watch my video on zombies in the cellar. That whole situation where there was a farmhouse surrounded by fences and wave after wave of zombies were pouring in. In this case, it is a castle under siege by goblins. And so all 4 sides will roll to see how many orcs and goblins get spawned every turn and are attacking this castle. Now, the castle defenders, and unlike zombies in the cellar, there were X amount of zombies, and once they ran out, the players won. In this case, the orcs and goblins, it's a never-ending horde. They're going to keep coming because the time limit is the adventurers have to go down and slay this demon lord who has put out like a beacon where orcs and goblins from all over the land are swarming to this castle. They have to go slay him, and once they do, the above ground, horde will stop. However, the castle defenders only have so many defenders and they can absolutely perish. So there are 13 rooms. The heroes need to get through all 13 rooms to get to the 14th room, which is the boss encounter. We'll go over that in a second. And if the castle defenders can hold off the horde for the 14 rooms, then the players win. But if the castle defenders don't hold them off and they do get into the keep, then the game's over. And you don't necessarily, it's a minimum of 14 rooms because the players can double back. Depending on what they find in a room, they may want to double back. And they still have to go through trap passageways. If they failed to disarm a passageway earlier on, they're still going to have to navigate through the traps later on if they're doubling back. Additionally, if the party is just nearly wiped out, they can surface again and rest at the castle and heal. But that's precious time lost. And then they're going to have to navigate through the thing again. So 14 rooms minimum if all goes well and they never have to double back a single time, because every room they encounter is another turn above ground where orcs and goblins are invading. Now that is like the big overarching scenario, whereas you can absolutely play just this without the whole castle complicating things. And it's just like a game of Dicey Depths. We're just going to try to get through all the rooms, get to the boss, whatever the case may be. So anyway, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there. Here's the entrance. So again, through the keep, the heroes are working their way down to try to go slay this demon lord who's summoning all the orcs and goblins, but it could be anything. Maybe we're going down to Subterranean Old Fortress or something like that. But anyway, so first room we encounter is this one. Flip over the card, Torture Chamber. We then roll a d3 and find out what specific event is taking place. Is it a 1, which would be mundane, nothing special? If we roll a 2, then Bodolf the Butcher appears. He has tier 2 stats, and he grants all enemies that spawn in the room with him defensive rerolls. Or, if we roll a 3, there's a torture victim. So we can either choose to assist the victim or continue to torture them. Now, of course, that's after combat. So after we flip this over, we find it's a torture chamber. We come over here to the torture chamber pack of room furnishings, and we will dump this out in the room and set it all up, and it'll look really, really cool with all these torture chamber accessories. And there's a room pack full of furnishings for every single room. But we would grab the torture chamber one and fill up the room. Then we would draw from the deck of monster cards, which we'll look at in a second. And that will be how we determine the monsters. Remember before, we were rolling on a table to see. And you know what? Sometimes we'd end up fighting zombies, maybe 3 times in an adventure. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to do a deck of cards where it would ensure, if you wanted, and you don't reshuffle, that you fought a different enemy every time. There's 20 different enemies in the monster deck with only 13 rooms. Means you're going to see a different enemy every single time, and you're not even going to see all the possible enemies. But anyway, so we flipped over that it's a torture chamber, fill in the room with the torture chamber stuff. We would draw a card from the monster deck, find out what monster it is, and roll to see how many monsters, roll up their attributes, just like a Dicey Depths adventure, and then battle them. Once that's done, we would then maybe, depending on what we rolled, if we rolled a 2, because you roll on this when you first populate the room, if it was Bodolf, in addition to the monsters you put in that room, you would also populate it with Bodolf the Butcher, who's basically just a tier 2 monster, but as long as he's alive, all enemies in the room get a defensive reroll, including him. So obviously the heroes are probably going to want to take out Bodolf first, but who knows. So then the torture victim, though, I love this one. Choose to assist or continue to torture him. So it's kind of a morality thing, and there's pros and cons to each. So you roll odds or evens, depending on what you wanted to do. So let's say we wanted to assist him, and we rolled odd? Well, we'd have to declare it first. So, if we're assisting him and we say, okay, evens, and we rolled an odd, then it would be a failure. But let's see. So if we assisted him and we were successful, they would provide us with an elixir. And so that's an item from the item deck. And every time we clear out a room, we get to draw a card from the item deck, just something we found in that room. And those are pretty much always a good thing. It's a basic way to give the heroes a little something for their efforts. But they would provide us with an elixir. But if we failed, the victim dies upon being released, but is grateful that we assisted them. So that was a nice thing, but we failed, so we don't get anything from it. However, if we decided to continue to torture them and we rolled a success, they would give us information about enemies in the next room, unless it's the final boss. If the next room were to be the final boss, we wouldn't get anything. But assuming the next room was just standard enemies, we could then re-roll failed attack rolls the entire next combat, because we learned a little something about their weakness. Or if we failed, they died, and I don't know, why is that not focusing? And curses us, and we have to re-roll any sixes we roll in the entire next combat in defense. So that would suck. But anyway, so we would do that. We would battle the monsters there, clear them out, and then it's up to us. Which direction do we want to go? In this case, do we want to go left? Do we want to go right? Either way, we then have to roll to see if we can disarm a trap. Every passageway is trapped in Dicey Depths Advanced. We have to roll to disarm the trap, and that is simply as it happened in that last one, in the original Dicey Depths game, where we would roll a target value, roll a d6 and get a number, like a 5, let's say. And then we nominate one player and one player only to try to disarm the trap. They get 3 rolls on a d6 to equal that number. So essentially, they got a 50% chance, potentially, of disarming the trap. Now, if you're the rogue, one of the rogue special abilities is they get 2d6 for all 3 of their attempts to try to disarm a trap. Now, if you succeed, you disarm the trap, and we'll put a little disarm marker in the passageway so that for the rest of the game, that passageway is no longer a threat to us. But if we failed to disarm the trap, then there's a whole deck of trap cards. Not only is there a deck of trap cards, but, well, let's pull them out. But there are also absolutely traps to populate it with as well. So let's see here. We have all of the room packs here. This is a deck of item cards. I think I may have shown off the item cards before. Here are all 20 different kinds of enemies that could spawn. And then below that, and that's why I love this. I mean, the whole thing is basically these 3 containers, and then of course this. But this is all just fun and games. You could absolutely just use, dry erase board and a marker, or pen and paper, whatever the case may be. Let's see here. So we have all of this. Here are all the traps and also a lot of other things as well. So, of course, we have spiked floors. So if a passageway ends up being trapped with spiked floors, we'll put the spikes in there. And that'll remain there every time. So if we ever have to double back or move through this passageway again, once we've failed to disarm it, it's failed to be disarmed the rest of the game. We're going to have to roll to avoid the trap if possible. And so that's spikes. Or we may have, flame jets. Or we may have a pit trap. Or I use this for poison gas. I tried to do a cotton ball, like a painted green cotton ball in here that I kind of pulled apart to make it look like a cloud. Folks, I am the least arts and craftsy person of all time. I could not do it. It looked terrible. And I couldn't find any other solutions for a poison gas trap. So if anyone has any ideas of hopefully somewhere I can just buy one, not something I have to do myself, I would be so grateful. But in the meantime, I'm using this as if this thing, out of its mouth is just pouring poison gas into the chamber, essentially. And then we have a slimed passageway. We have crushing walls. So these freestanding walls are so cool. You can just imagine them like moving together to smash you like the trash compactor in the Death Star or whatever the case may be. So there's those kind of walls. Of course, the falling boulder. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Arrow walls, spear traps. There's even bats. Look at these little bats. How cool is this? I got these painted for me by Alternative Armies as part of a commission I did before, but they fit perfectly in here. So here's bats. I mean, there's just so many things. And so anyway, let's take a peek at some of these cards now. So we have the deck of room cards. We have the deck of trap cards, and we have the whole deck of monster cards. There's 20 monsters here. I made these all myself. Look at that. I took these pictures too. But we have cultists, we have goblins, we have owlbears. I mean, there's everything in here. Dryads. Now, I added a new thing. I added a class because in some of the rooms will affect monsters of a certain class, and we'll look at that in a second. And I also put if they're tier 1 or tier 2, what their ability is, and a brief description of it. So here's the whole deck of 20 monster cards we'll be drawn from. Here are all the different rooms. So we have a chapel, we have the Catacombs, the Great Hall, Blacksmith, Sacrificial Altar, Arcane Study, a kitchen, a storeroom, barracks, throne room, campsite, dungeon, torture chamber. What was one that gives us something? Here we go, like in the Catacombs, for example. So we pull the Catacombs card, we fill the room in with the Catacombs furniture, and then we roll a D3. Look at this. Regenerate. All monsters have the regenerate ability or undead reinforcements plus D4 skeletons. But actually, that's not the card I wanted. I wanted one that gives us something. Okay, here, the Blacksmith. If we roll a 2, humanoid enemies receive +1 to attack and defense for that entire combat. And a humanoid enemy is something like an orc. So if we unfortunately manage to pull a orc monster card in the Blacksmith, if there were orcs in the Blacksmith, they get +1 to their attack and defense dice. So, I mean, that would just be absolutely miserable on top of their other special abilities. Let's take a look at some of these traps as well, actually. So for traps, again, we have bats. So declare odd or even, roll a d6 if it's a failure. And only one, and every player does this. So only one player gets to try to disarm the trap. And if they fail and the trap springs, then every player has to roll for this effect. So every player would declare odd or even, and every player would roll a d6 to see if they could dodge the bats. Every player who fails gets a disease token. The falling boulder, speed test, roll 1d6 below your speed attribute. And if you fail, it's just straight up 2 wounds. There's some in here that you can't really avoid. So here, like flame jets. 4d6 attack, ignoring armor. So that's just every player roll a 4d6 attack against yourself, ignoring your armor value, which means all 4 dice are going to hit. You then get 4 dice to try to negate as much of that 4 dice as you can. And of course, every die you fail to negate is a wound, essentially. But yeah, so there's a whole bunch of traps. So that is the way that this situation works. You move into a room, you draw a room card, you populate the room, you draw a monster card, populate it with monsters. Engage the combat. After combat, decide, do you want to move on or do you want to go back? You can go back if things aren't looking too good. But again, it's not the... Now, if we weren't playing with the castle rules, there is no going back to the surface. You just have to press on. You can still go back to other rooms because there is a room in here where you can rest, or a couple rooms that you can rest, depending on if you roll a D3 and it lets you rest there. Like the barracks, I think, will let you rest in there. And so if you don't want to rest the time you discover the room, you can go back there and rest later. But again, if there are trap passageways in between you and the room you want to get to, you have to navigate that trap passageway again. But anyway, so you enter a room, you populate the room, or you draw the room card, populate it, draw a monster card, populate with monsters, engage in combat, after combat, do any post-combat activities, then choose a direction if there's more than one. And then you roll to see if you disarm the trap. If you don't, populate it with a trap. Every player tries to do what they do to dodge the trap, and then go into the next room, whichever one that may be. Draw a room card, draw a monster card, combat, choose a direction, passageway, and you keep doing that until all rooms are discovered. Once you have discovered the 13th room, you have unlocked the secret in order to, and you'll hear this, you may be on the other end of the dungeon. Look at this wall. Look how gorgeous that looks. That's a Resin Dwarven Forge in all of its glory. But you hear a click and a shuffle, and the portcullis, this passage has been blocked off the entire time. And now that you've discovered the 13th room, you've discovered the secret, goes up, and here you go. You come up the stairs into the boss chamber, enter between the demons, and then you battle whatever the final boss ends up being. Basically, the final boss is just a roll to see what ability it has and what its stats are. And I also took these torches off here because they were also a little too big when you put the lid on the table. But boom, there you go. And then you could put anything in there. You could have it be a chimera, you could have it be a dragon, you could have it be a huge demon, whatever the case may be. You just roll for its stats and roll on the ability chart to see what kind of abilities it has. And then the type of boss can be anything, which is why I love it. It's miniature agnostic. You can have anything you want. You can predetermine it at the beginning of the adventure and say, you know what, we're going into the dragon's den. We're going to battle this demon that's been summoning all these orcs and goblins, whatever the case may be. But folks, just look at this. Just look at this table of 3D glory. And as much as I love the Dwarven Knight, and you know I've done another even bigger dungeon than this on this table that was nothing but the Dwarven Knight pieces, which are nice. They have a heft to them themselves, are pre-painted, Dwarven Forge. But I mean, look at this. Look at this next to a resin piece. I mean, come on. This is that polystone resin. It is so nice. Sounds like rock. Sounds like a hard, literally stone. And this sounds more plasticky because it's like a rubbery dwarvenite material, which I still love. I love how durable it is and stuff. And honestly, I do really like the floors, the texture on the floors. Here's the resin floors. And you'll notice the resin doesn't play the best with each other. You can see some unfortunate gaps and stuff that are just unavoidable with the resin, whereas the dwarvenite, look at that, there are no gaps. It just fits together so perfectly. So there's pros and cons to both. Like, look at all the grub. Of course, as you're talking about a dungeon floor that's probably been there for centuries, of course the tiles are going to have shifted and whatnot. But look at this, some of these big pre-made resin floors with the work, with the stonework in the center. Oh my gosh, how gorgeous is this? So look at all that. But for those of you who've stuck around, you're in for a treat, because now I am going to populate all these rooms with the dungeon dressing, and we're going to see what this dungeon looks like completely populated. Okay, actually, I'm back real fast. Before we do that, I'm going to draw the cards. I'm going to literally draw the cards as if we were going through the rooms, room by room. And that way, you will know ahead of time what I'm putting in each room. And of course, we'll talk about it later, but I have the rooms here. I have the 13 rooms. I'm going to shuffle them up, and then we're going to draw them. And then I'll pause and populate all the rooms with the furniture, and then we'll be back. But I just want you to see how we will do this. All right, here we go. This is going to be a long one, but I think it's worth it. Okay, so here we go. We'll just put the deck there. All right, so we are heroes working our way through this dungeon. Let me actually grab. This will be us, and this will be our companion. We'll be a three-party adventuring crew with Matilda the mage, Humphrey the archer, and of course Dole. Look at Dole. This is Dole in his younger years. Moving down. Look at that. Boom. And if you actually wanted to, just imagine playing a skirmish game on this, where you actually had to move space by space. You have a speed attribute, and you move space by space through the entire thing like a tactical war game. In this game, it doesn't matter. You just move from room to passage to room. But if you wanted to get really tactical with it, you absolutely could. All right, so anyway, so we made our way down the stairs into the subterranean lair. Room number 1 is the barracks. So that actually doesn't, that makes kind of sense. Now I will say this. One of the rooms is a dining room, it's called a great hall, and one of the rooms is a kitchen. I'm anxious to see how far apart the kitchen and the great hall end up being. And again, I shuffled this. I did not stack the deck. First room, though, is the barracks. Let's just move on. We got to get through this whole thing. So here's the dungeon. The dungeon within a dungeon. There's going to be prisoner cells in here. Come down here. There is the torture chamber. We saw that earlier. Torture chamber. Let's come over here to this large room that's all off on its own. It is the chapel. All right, light amongst the darkness. That's a good room for the players to find. This room is the arcane study. Love that room. There's a lot of cool bookshelves and stuff in there. Next room, the throne room. We'll make that the throne room. And that's actually kind of cool because you think, what's a throne room doing down below the castle? This could be like, if things went bad above ground and then we had to go below ground. Look at this. The throne room, the room I just chose randomly, is actually behind the secret door. So there's a secret door into a passage, and if you don't realize that there's another secret door at the end of the passage, you think, okay, we just found a secret passage. It must be a storeroom, a treasure room, or something like that. No, actually, it's nothing. It's just a passageway to get into this other secret door. That this is where the throne room is. That's where the Lord goes. That's his panic room. All right, next up, we're going up here. Here's the catacombs. Cool. I got some catacombs pieces. We're just going to move to the right. Here's the kitchen. All right. So the kitchen is right next to the catacombs. Gross. I thought some of that jerky was a little tough. All right. Next, we're going to the next one. Storeroom. Okay. So the kitchen next to the storeroom. That doesn't seem too far-fetched. We haven't found the Great Hall yet. Campsite. All right. So we're going here with the campsite. And over here. And of course, this is not how we would do it at the beginning of the game. We wouldn't put well, you almost could if you didn't look at the cards and just put them face down in all the empty rooms. And then when you went into the room, flip the card face up. You could absolutely do that. But as intended, you would just leave the deck there. And as you enter the room, then flip the card. But you wouldn't know where all these rooms were ahead of time. So now we're going to come over here. Great Hall. Okay, so the Great Hall's a bit of a ways away, but actually not too bad. I was afraid like the kitchen would be there and the Great Hall would be like way down here or something. Still, that's a decent way to, bring the food. So let's come down over here. Blacksmith. All right. So the barracks are actually right next to the blacksmith. So there's no door here. So if you're here and you want to get here, you have to move all the way down through here and then come up through there. You'll notice some of the doors, like a rodent or something chewed through it, which is kind of cool. But the blacksmith is next to the barracks. That's cool. And the 13th and final room is the Sacrificial Altar, which actually makes sense that is next to the arcane study. You can almost think a necromancer did that. So anyway, there's all that. We're not done, folks. We are going to also populate all of the passageways with traps. Now, do I have enough traps to do that with? Let's see. No, I actually don't. I know for a fact I don't, but let's go ahead and draw what I do have first. So let's go here. This passageway is trapped with bats. This passageway is trapped with poisonous gas. The passageway to the throne room has a spear trap. Passageway to the catacombs has a pit trap. We'll skip over here. This one has spiked floors. This one has crushing walls because I want to put out all the trap accessories too. This one has an arrow wall. What about this little one here? This one is a slime trap. This one down here is a falling boulder. And last but not least, see, we almost had enough, but the thing is here, if we are unfortunate enough to not disarm any of the traps and all the passageways end up trapped, that's okay. I have enough traps in here to populate some of the passageways with the same trap twice. So if we go through the whole trap deck, we just reshuffle it, and the trap components that are in the passageway stay there, shuffle the deck, and redraw for the next passageway. And I have extra components for all the traps. Even the bats, I'd have to go get those though. And flame jets, we'll put that up here. Look at this, I even did this. This is totally unnecessary, but this passageway had like a bricked up area. Like this thing continued on in that direction, but actually the passageway over there caved in. So then they just bricked that up. I thought that was kind of cool. But there's flame jets in that passageway. All right, should we do the same with monsters too? You know what? Let's just do it. We're going all out. I'm going to have to put this all back away again. But hey, you know what? Whatever the case may be. So again, there's only 13 rooms here. I am going to populate the boss chamber as well with the final boss, but I do want to see how many monsters there are actually. And again, we're not going to see them all. We're only going to see 13 of the 20. So let's see who we have here. And I'm also even going to roll for the quantity of monsters as well. So here's the monster deck. I'll be right back. I need to get some dice. Okay, and we are back. All right, so what I'm going to do, look at this. This is insane. Is obviously I'm not going to roll for all the monster stats, but I'm going to roll to see how many of each type of monster there are. So in the barracks where we first moved in, there are elementals. All right, elementals are a tier 2. That means we're basically rolling a d3. So we're going to take this d6 and cut it in half. So it's a 2, which means there's only 1. There is 1, and I'm going to put a die on every card, because when I go through here and actually put the furniture and put the monsters in, that'll remind me how many elementals there are. So when we first moved down into the barracks, there was an elemental there. Coming over here, there are kobolds. Kobolds are a tier 1, which means we take the d6 at its face value. Holy smokes, there's 6. There are 6 kobolds in that room. All right, coming over here, we have spiders. Of course, there's spiders in the chapel, but how many? They're a tier 1 as well, so that's face value. There's 4 spiders there. All right, how about in the dungeon? There are wolves. There are wolves in the dungeon. How did all these different things get in here? And there's 5. Geez, we keep rolling high for the tier 1s. In the throne room, there are ratmen. Of course, ratmen took over the throne room. How many ratmen? Oh, just one. Just one ratman in the throne room. He probably locked himself in there. Catacombs. Ghosts! Oh my gosh, how perfect is that? How many ghosts? They're tier 1. 4. There are 4 ghosts in the catacombs. Oh my gosh, how cool is this going to look? In the arcane study, we have slimes. All right. How many slimes are there? 5 slimes? Good God. Oh my goodness, that's insane. All right, coming over to the Sacrificial Altar. I would hate to be actually playing this game. There's skeletons. Skeletons in the Sacrificial Altar room. We are rolling terrible. 5 tier 1 skeletons. Good Lord. I don't know. This would be a terrible battle for the heroes to try to get through all this. All right, so in the Blacksmith, there are trolls. Trolls are a tier 2, so again, this is going to be a D3. So just one troll. Not bad, not bad. So we got a couple rooms with only a few monsters in them. All right, so let's go into the Great Hall. Zombies. Tier 1 zombies, which means this is a straight up D6. 5 zombies? Good Lord. All right, next up, let's go to the kitchen. We have goblins. Of course, there's goblins in the kitchen. And roll to see what you got. 2, so they are tier 1, so that'll be face value. All right, so how many rooms left? Okay, so we have 2 rooms left. We have the campsite, which has dryads. Ooh. Dryads in the campsite. And how many of those? Those are tier 2, so this is a D3. Just 1. Look at this. For all these tier 2 creatures, we only have 1 of them. And then the storeroom, before we roll, what is it? Owl bears, of course. There are owl bears in the storeroom. And look at that. It's a tier 2, which means we cut that in half. That means it's a 3. There are 3 owlbears, the max amount of owlbears. Holy smokes. Now, of course, some of these rooms would actually have potentially other things in there. Like the torture chamber, there may be a torture victim in there. In the dungeon, there may be a prisoner in there. We saw earlier, I think it was the torture chamber. Yeah, it could be Bodolf the Butcher in the torture chamber. But so there could be additional monsters, additional things, NPCs or whatever in these rooms as well. We're not going to do that. But here we go, folks. You saw it. I'm now going to populate this entire thing with figures and terrain, and we will be back. Folks, welcome back to Dicey Depths Advanced. Here it is. This is the fully populated dungeon. I mean, come on, let's do some flyovers here. There's the chapel with the spiders. There's the bats in that passageway. Here's the torture chamber with the kobolds. There is a prisoner, a torture chamber victim in the cage. Here is the passageway where this thing, just kind of imagine that it was in place of one of the walls, pouring the poison gas into the passageway. In here, here's the dungeon. Here are the cells with all of the wolves. And, the warden seems to be, on the take. He's got a lot of coin there. But there is a prisoner, which you, depending on the room event, you can potentially help or not. And they may or may not join your party. Here are the catacombs with some corpses, but also the 4 ghosts. Pit traps in the passageway there. We have this, I just laid some spears in there, spear trap passageway with the rat man in the throne room. Of course, when we first came down, this is where we should have began anyway. When you first enter the dungeon, we entered into the barracks where there was a lone elemental waiting. In this passageway, the Boulder trap. In the arcane study, you have the 5 slimes. And of course, in addition to whatever the room is, and you roll to see what the actual thing is in the room, there's so much space for you to role play. Why do there happen to be slimes in the arcane study? Is that an experiment gone wrong and has just been festering in there ever since? But of course, there's a bunch of cool stuff on the tables and everything. Spiked floors in that passageway, leading into the blacksmith chamber where there's a troll. That passageway is a slime passageway. I just swapped out the passageway for the slime one. Here is the sacrificial altar with the 5 skeletons and the corpses being summoned and all kind of little arcane tokens. Crushing walls passageway. Here's the campsite where the dryad resides. Here is the great hall with the 5 zombies. Here are the arrow slit walls in that passageway. Here is the storeroom with the owlbears and the goblins in the kitchen and the flame jets in that passageway, taking us back to the catacombs. So there it is. Look at that. Can you believe it? Completely 100% functional. Of course, all the monsters wouldn't be populated. We would enter this room, fight the elemental, and remove it. Move into the next room, fight the troll, remove it. Get through here, fight the skeletons. So they wouldn't all be out here like this. This is like a once-in-a-lifetime view of all the rooms populated with, furniture and monsters all at the same time. But just look at that, folks. Look at that. Oh, it is a dream come true. And then I did just populate, our heroes in the final boss, maybe going up against a Demogorgon or a Silver Dragon or a Manticore or a zombie beholder. And then we just roll up the stats and give him an ability, and then the battle commences. Look at that. How freaking cool does that look? But that's it, folks. That is Dicey Depths Advanced. So again, it's all based on the decks. This is all just fluff that you're looking at here. You could absolutely roll up your character attributes and then just go through the deck. 1 room at a time. Roll to see what the room is. Roll to see what the monsters are. You know, like I always do, put the monster stats on these monster cards, battle them, gain experience points, move on, level up, get items at the end of each room. We didn't even look at the item deck. I think we've looked at this before. But in case we haven't, here is a whole deck of potential items. Of course, I can't get them out. Here's a couple. So here's an elixir. Here's a Defender's Draught, +1 to defense dice one time. They have a value because in between campaigns, you can sell them for half their face value and go to the marketplace and purchase new items, which are just, you know, drawn from that deck for the merchant's available stock, and then move on. But look at this. Are you kidding me? I could just stare at this for a while. I'll probably take some good pictures on this. And if I know I have a Facebook page, I haven't linked to it, but if you just search my name, same name that I have on YouTube, that's typically where I post all my pictures of my layouts and stuff like that on there. But otherwise, folks, if you have any questions, I mean, of course, there's a lot of things like, where did you get all this? How much did this cost? I'll probably also record an overview of this to put it at the beginning to kind of answer some of those questions or to hopefully prevent them from being asked, just because I have no idea. I can't even begin to think of what this actually costs because, of course, if you've been following my channel, I've been collecting this stuff for over a decade now. And I just don't know what the current market value of some of these sets are. Some of them you can't get anymore. Those that you can come in different variations. The packs, the makeups are all different. The accessories, the miniatures. I mean, it's just from all over the place. Most of this is Dwarven Forge. Most of the accessories are a mix of Dwarven Forge and WizKids, and everything's pre-painted here. There's only a couple things that aren't pre-painted that were miniatures that I commissioned, like the Dryad way over there. That's from Free Blades. But I can't begin. But if you have a question about a specific thing, like where did you get the poison mouth wall looking thing, that's just from one of the WizKids sets. But if you do have any specific questions, definitely don't hesitate to ask, as long as it's how much did all this cost. I have no idea, nowhere to even begin to think about how much it all costs. But anyway, folks, that'll do it. Thank you all so much for watching. I do truly appreciate it. And until next time.